Hello and welcome to the DEVIANT'S tour. I'm Eric Cervini and I am here with the incredible Blair Imani and also my friend and publicist Vivian Shaw. Before I to my predominantly white fans, we must do better. I've posted a link in our Crowdcast description for those who are hoping to make a difference, to our friends who identify as QTPOC. And in the meantime, please join me in a moment of silence to honor the lives of Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and too many others. Thank you. I'm now going to pass the speaking sick to Vivian, who can get to the more formal introductions for our event.
Hi, everybody. So happy to be here. This is our Dallas event in partnership with Interabang Books. They could not be here tonight, but we always love to plug independent bookstores, especially during this time. They need our support, so as much as possible, definitely order from independent bookstores. Interabang specifically has a hand-picked selection, and they have been serving the Dallas community since July of 2017. You can find a link to their book on Eric's website, ericcervini.com/book. And there is also a link, if you click the little eye at the top of the screen next to the description, that will take you to their website, as well as some other places where you can make a difference, as Eric mentioned earlier. And now the lights just went out.
The lights just go out.
Without further ado, dramatic. I would love to introduce Blair Imani. Blair is a critically acclaimed historian, outspoken advocate, an activist, and a dynamic public speaker. She's written 2 historical books, Modern Her Story, Stories of Women and Non-Binary People Rewriting History, and Making Our Way Home, The Great Migration and the Black American Dream. She centers women and girls, global Black communities, and the LGBTQ community. And Blair does not do all of this education for free, so if you want to support Blair, there is a button right at the bottom that says Support Blair, and you should click that to find access to the books that she's written, as well as her Patreon.
And right being that we are in Dallas.
No way! I don't even have a cowboy hat.
It's too tight. I'm not gonna wear it the whole time. I just wanted y'all to know that we are in Texas. Okay.
In Texas. Right underneath the Support Blair button, there's also an Ask a Question button. So just wanted to point that out for folks. Or if you're watching on Facebook, if you ask a question in the comments, those will get transferred over as well. And without further ado, I will introduce my friend Eric. Dr. Eric Cervini is an award-winning historian of LGBTQ politics and culture. He graduated summa cum laude from Harvard College and received his PhD in history from the University of Cambridge, where he was a scholar.
Oh,
that's it. That's it. I keep going.
That's all I got.
He also wrote a book.
Ooh, it looks good. You know, some people who got it, the people who got it from Amazon, this is what you get from ordering from Amazon, they got like fingerprints all over it. So I highly recommend, thank you, Vivian, for those introductions. But this is in support of independent bookshops. So the other thing you can click in addition to supporting the Marsha P. Johnson Institute and the Sylvia Rivera Law Center are links to both of our books from Interabang. See, I was very dehydrated that day, so it's like I had to do that.
Fine.
But anyway, so we're both in Los Angeles. Vivian, I'm going to minimize you, so thank you for that. We're going to bring you back later. As she said, if you have any questions for Blair, please ask. This is about how the LGBTQ plus community can be a part of this moment and declare that Black Lives Matter and that Black trans lives matter. And so I'm so excited to be having this conversation. I wish it could be in person, but thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. It is really exciting for folks who are watching, and I'm going to link to it after, but hopefully some of my Instagram folks will come. In the past 48 hours, white America has decided that racism is a problem, and luckily a lot of us have been working on it, and the people have found us. And so, like, I personally have gotten over 100,000 followers. I keep trying to alienate them and tell them that, like, I'm not here to make you comfortable. And they're like, okay, queen, please. And it's cool. You know, they want to listen. A lot of them want to apologize, and there's work to do. So that's interesting. But as far as what I was saying was that it's exciting that we had already on the books. We did not account for a uprising of the United States and international folks, like, you know, shouting Black Lives Matter, people, you know, I guess you can always account for racism, but you can't always account for the response. And so I was so glad that we were able to keep this appointment so that way we could talk about the work that I do, because it's one thing to share the cult of personality around a person and, you know, turn scholars into influencers, but it's another thing to really, like, say, hey, no, this is the work that we're doing. So it's a good time to talk about my book and talk about your book. And like I was saying before, I totally thought we were live, by the way, everybody. We were in the room, and I was like ready to go. But this book, Deviant's War, the Homosexual versus the United States of America, it's really grounding because this is Pride Month, you know, and so many people do not know, hopefully more, that last year was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, Stonewall uprising against police brutality and respectability. And so there has been a war on the gay menace, the Lavender Menace, and when Dr. Eric sent this book over, it was with a questionnaire about how much fellatio I had provided and how much sodomy I had engaged in, because that's real shit that the United States government asks of gay people. And I'm sure you get into blue discharge and all types of things in here. I talk about that in my book, and it's just cool to see alignment.
Yes, and thank you for the plug. And I think, you know, following your own explosion on social media, I think one thing that's so compelling that you've been saying about your own activism and so many other activists is that, yes, there is this groundswell in action this past week or two, but there are people within the movement, including you, who have been at work doing the hard work without the hundreds of thousands of followers and without you know, this groundswell of support. So thank you for doing it from day one. And I want to actually go back in time a little bit first and find out, because there aren't many popular historians out there, right? There aren't many people who do what we do, writing history, not just for the academy, but for everyone.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm curious, you know, I'd love to hear about how you first got interested in history and then also your activism.
Yeah, so it's very aligned. You know, I think I have to tell the activism piece first. So growing up, my parents are very like affirming of queer identity, like almost it was too much. Like, my parents were the kind of parents that were like, when are you coming out? We want to know. And like, my brother's gay, I'm gay. I'm bisexual, and my parents were 4 years apart. It's awkward to learn sex ed, period. My brother and I had to learn sex ed together at the doctor's office because my parents didn't know how to educate us about like same sex or same gender relationships. And so they just sent us to the doctor together to learn about like all types, you know, all the things, prophylactics and like dental dams and like everything. And so we both learned about things that I guess didn't apply to each other, but whatever, you know, we're healthy teens. And so this was when we were teens, and so my parents were very affirming, and so I decided to go to school in Louisiana. One of the first people, I went to Louisiana State University, go Tigers. One of the first people I met was a good friend of mine. We're still friends. I'll call him Keith, that's not his name, but I always like to use, he's a white dude. And I told him about what it was like being gay in my family. I was like, well, yeah, well, he was like, well, I'm gay. And I was like, oh, that's cool, I'm bisexual. And he was like, you're just going to say it like that, like so loudly? And I didn't understand like hesitation, because like there was this kid named Hunter at my school in high school, and he was gay, and everybody thought that was so fucking like, did you hear Hunter's gay? Like, it was like a cool thing. And so even though I'm sure he probably dealt with bullying even here, but Keith, as I decided to call him, got sent to conversion therapy and went to a camp where they did electroshock therapy to make him straight. And that was the first introduction I really had into understanding, like, fuck, like I had a really charmed existence. And there's a fight to be fought. So some of the first activism I did was working with Equality Louisiana and Louisiana Progress on, like, I would literally, Baton Rouge is the capital, state capital of Louisiana. I had my classes on Tuesday and Thursday. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, if like, you know, shit was in session, I was lobbying with my little outfits from Neiman Marcus Last Call because they're cheap, and looking professional, and going to church with people who are like, you know, the senators and stuff, to just be like, you know, like, God wants us to love our neighbors. Like, what are you doing? I'm Muslim now, but even when I was converting to Islam, I would be like in the pews being like, what's up, Senator, whatever, you know? So that was a lot of my work. It turned into more grassroots as the moment called for it, specifically around Mike Brown, around Black Lives Matter emerging. And at the same time, I was working at the African American Museum in Baton Rouge, which was founded by Sadie Roberts Joseph, Miss Sadie, as I called her. And I had to do, you know, for most history programs, you have to do some type of like a independent study. The only independent study options I had, and I wanted to work at a museum, was to work at a plantation. And I refused because my ancestors already did that shit, you know? And so that's no longer the case. There's been a lot of change made in the history department, alhamdulillah, you know, praise God. But at the time, I was like, okay, well, I found a museum that is a Black museum, and I don't know why LSU doesn't have a relationship with them. You literally, it's up the street. So I established that while I was there for my independent study. And Miss Sadie taught me about Reconstruction and how to preserve artifacts and how to, like, go to a field that used to be like a, you know, former plantation, and how to like dig artifacts from a half century ago or a century ago. Oh. You know, like she was, and I'm speaking about her in the past tense because tragically as fuck, like she was murdered July last year. And it took me such a long, I'm still processing it, but it wasn't really until I was on tour with a book that I literally dedicated to her that I started to realize how much she lives on in me. And my last memory of her, she's like in her 80s. She's, you know, small woman, but full of fucking might, you know, always wore a dashiki, loved the color purple. She had a machete, and she was teaching one of the fraternity groups that we had brought to the museum how to cut down a tree properly, because we needed to cut down a tree. She was like, oh, here, use my machete that I happen to have. And they were doing it. And she's like, that's not how you do it. It's like this. You got to put your back into it. And so she taught me that you cannot purport to be a person, you know, to purport to care about people, especially a people who have been denied the ability to even read and learn for themselves, and then keep the knowledge exclusive. So all of my work is written at a 5th grade level, which is a challenge, as I'm sure you know, to turn PhD level stuff into 5th grade level and still can capture meaning. It can be done. I do it. But it's just frustrating because, like, you don't have to use these, as my dad calls it, $10 words. My dad went to Harvard as well. And even though he says that, he does it. And, like, he'll say, well, let's expeditiously preambulate instead of walk across the street. And I feel like that's what a lot of academics do. But Miss Sadie taught me that, like, if you are so caught up in academia that you are not willing to chop down a tree with a machete and, you know, fix up the museum and do all of the parts of the work the way that, like, archaeology really stresses, where you have to be engaged with the field but also the text, that informs my work. So as I was researching my book, I like did interviews with family members, and then I was on a budget. Okay, I did this one in a year. Never write a book in a year. Don't do that.
Oh my god.
No. So actually, yeah, long story. We'll talk more about that offline. It was stressful. But I speak for a living. And so my manager, Marielle, was scheduling me. So, okay, I land in Michigan at 10 a.m. I have to get to the Motown Museum. I have a meeting with the Motown Museum. I leave at 1. I'm speaking at a university at 2. So this book got done by the grace of God, literally, and by all my ancestors blessing me. And it was still an uphill battle. But, like, the whole point of it was to bring it to the people. And I think that's the most powerful thing with history, is that there's not popular historians, because, like, you know, let me tell you, this is the last thing, and then we'll go to your next question, but people have to know this. Like, as I was on tour, particularly when I was in Detroit, I went to the Detroit Barnes & Noble, and I went to the front, and I was like, hi, I'm an author, as you do, You bring your own pen, because that's another thing. Apparently, every author is supposed to have their favorite pen. I didn't know this till recently, but okay, I'll play along. When in Rome. And so I'm like, hey, I'm here to sign my book, da da da. I also, as a precaution, put my own face on the front of my book. That's me. Just so, just in case. But anyway, so she was like, oh, okay, no problem. I'll go get our social media person. Social media person walked straight past me. And I even smiled and was like, hi. And she waved back and then kept walking. Walks the whole store looking for a historian. And then goes, oh my gosh, is it you? And I was like, yeah. She's like, you don't look like a historian. And I was like, I know, because we live in a white supremacist society, which is why it's so crucial that you promote my book. Anyway, for some reason, a week later, my book was the book of Barnes & Noble, and it was trending like #1 sell. But it's a constant uphill battle to not look like you belong in the field that you're helping to transform.
Mm-hmm. And it's especially true. I mean, queer history itself is a pretty new field. And I think there's still, I was having this exact same conversation with Alok, who just put out the same day as me. Yeah. About the gender binary, which is another extremely new, gender studies and gender theory is an extremely new field. And these new fields that feel like they have to justify their existence, I think still are attached to the lingo, as you say. And on top of that, there's just the white supremacy that runs through not just history, but also the sciences, the misogyny that runs through everything. So I thank you for doing the hard work, because I know how impossible it is to write a book in a year, so let alone to make it accessible. So
people ask me, they're like, Blair, because I only have an undergrad degree only, but people they're like, Blair, when are you going to go get your master's? When are you going to get your PhD? I did a poll on my Instagram. Everybody already thinks I have a master's, whatever. And then the way that people imbue activist scholars with authority, after I got arrested, a year after I had been arrested for the protests in Baton Rouge in honor of Alton Sterling to get the people who had killed him accountable. A year after that, I was lecturing at Yale with an undergrad degree. That's not supposed to happen. So I wore an NWA t-shirt and Yeezys and joggers, and a blazer. It was very posh. And then my sister started posting hashtag jail to Yale, which was a mess. But the way that I feel I am imbued with privilege, in the sense that, because I had proximity to the work, I have more authenticity, and I become more of a marvel. Mm-hmm. Then when I double down and I'm like, not only you're giving me access to the space and I'm bringing my knowledge with me, and that knowledge isn't exclusive to academia. And I feel like I have an advantage, because so much of the Great Migration history that I've done, and like you said, so much of the history that I'm involved in and that you're involved in are emerging. It's to me, and I keep telling my parents this, but they won't relent, that because so much of the study and knowledge is held outside of the academy, it doesn't make sense for me to go inside the academy to advance my scholar work. But I really feel that this book, one person told me that the illustration disarms you from the academic rigor contained within, and I was like, that's a backhanded compliment.
I was gonna say that's offensive. Yeah. Also to the artist, I wish I could have had more. I mean, as you probably know, I'm not sure as much about illustrations in illustrated books, but for my book, authors have no control over the art at all on the jacket or anything. Were you able to, at least, I guess if your face is on it?
Yeah. Okay. No, creative direction AF. This is actually a family picture. Let me stop everything and say the illustrator, Rochelle Baker Draws, .com. You can contact her. She's actually open commissions right now. This is her name. The one thing I can't control is for some reason, a lot of publishing houses don't want the author's name on the front, which is weird, but her statement is all over the place. So this is a family photo. So this is the original. This is original. Only 3 people are an original in it. These 2 and Uncle Lester. That's me. That's my partner, Akeem. Super cute. This is my great aunt, Carmen, my great uncle, Clarence, who I just learned grew up in Mexico and was part of the people who moved following, basically, for those who don't know, Juneteenth is coming up, and it's because Texas essentially decided we're not going to free enslaved people. So a lot of Black Americans, well, they weren't Americans yet, but in the context, anyway, they moved to Mexico, and my Uncle Clarence was part of that group. And then Uncle Lester, who looks a lot like my friend Miles Lofton, but Uncle Lester is gay. And Uncle Lester came out late in life, and he deserves a partner. So we gave him a partner because he was standing next to a woman, but you could tell it was like awkward as hell. Like he was kind of like, I'm not about this, you know? So we gave Uncle Lester a partner. And it's so funny because I was on NPR at the beginning of my tour. And a lot of people, when they hear Black History Book, especially in various spaces, you have the moms who have biracial children who are buying a book to check a box. Some are actually wanting to learn, especially now. But this one Black man, he like comes to the Detroit bookstore. A lot of stuff happened in Detroit. Comes to the Detroit comic book store where we were selling the books. And he like runs in. I heard you on NPR. So good to meet you. Please sign my book. Bye. Bought 3 copies. I get an email from him. He gave me his business card. I get an email from him, and not a day later, I didn't know there was gay propaganda in this book. And I'm like, there's gay couple right on the front. And the funny thing is, a lot of gay people recognize immediately that there's queerness. But straight people, they aren't paying attention to us, nor are they paying attention to our representation. Because it means a lot more to us because we have skin in the game. So he was pissed. And I was like, it's on the cover, sir. Thank you for your sale.
I am obsessed with that. I have almost the opposite problem because the title of my book is The Deviant Tour, the Homosexual versus the United States of America. But what I didn't expect, I always meant for it to be tongue-in-cheek. And of course, deviant was a word from the past that isn't really used.
Do people think you're like
People think they see it on Facebook or on social media, and they think that it is an anti-gay manifesto from an ultra-right nutshell.
That is thick. Okay.
Yeah, it's a lot of anti-gay propaganda.
That reminds me of when I worked at Planned Parenthood, and I worked at Planned Parenthood. I got hired like maybe 4 months before Trump became president. We were like, anyway, more on that later. More on that never. But the hashtag defend Planned Parenthood was going around, and anti-people were using it and buying merch that said defend Planned Parenthood. And we're sending money to this organization because they can't read, and they thought it said defund. So we were getting money from people who were like asking, like, can I get a refund? Because I thought this was defund Planned Parenthood, and I just gave y'all money on accident. And it's like,
don't give them a refund. I mean, it's almost depressing because it's like it never really, like, I knew it was tongue in cheek. I was using a word that wasn't really in use anymore, and even back then, yes, it was used by the government and the FBI to persecute gays, but it shows that like the first instinct when you hear these words, because deviant just means statistically different, right?
Yeah.
And homosexual, that was the word. It's
very clinical, but yeah, it was the word.
Sure. And so for people now to think automatically, oh, these words are negative, I think it just goes to show how much work we have to do to reclaim some of these words for ourselves and how much is just built into what we've been taught. But I want to ask for people who may not know what the Great Migration is, can you tell me about it? Talk to me about why you chose this topic and what you learned.
So my editor, Caitlin Ketchum, I worked with her on my first book, Modern History, which, very brief, the way that I kind of broke from being tangentially part of academia in more of like a specimens context to being a published author twice is because LeVar Burton shouted me out. We know LeVar Burton from Reading Rainbow and also from Roots. And I had thanked him at some point. So I worked at Planned Parenthood. I got verified on Twitter. Then I forgot that you don't realize when your platform changes, you just I'm 26. I'm just stumbling through life. And so I was younger then. Anyway, so I was like, one day I want to thank LeVar Burton for teaching me how to be an enthusiastic reader. He responds and he goes, you just did, Blair, but you don't have to take my word for it. I proceed to hyperventilate for 2 hours. Flash forward to when I'm trying to get this book published. We had done a fundraiser, we being me and Monique Lay, the illustrator, who I found because she was doing memes on Twitter. It's a very internet story. LeVar Burton decides to pick it up and go and quote tweets us and says, somebody published this woman's book overnight. People are like, oh, can we see your book proposal? Can we speak to your book agent? Here's the tea. I don't know what a book proposal is. I don't know that book agent is a job. And so I call one of my friends who's been published, Feminista Jones. She very quickly gets me on the phone. I'm like, okay, well, we're getting a lot of requests right now. I want to make sure everyone has time to engage with us. Please hold. Meanwhile, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Give me a sec. And so I quickly got my ducks in a row. And that's how I ended up meeting with Caitlin Ketchum after 17 rejections for this book idea. And it was very cute. And so Caitlin reaches out to me a month before the book comes out, Modern History, and is like, we need another book from you. And I was like, oh, this is great. And it was specifically to meet the need for a book around the 50th anniversary of the official designation of Black History Month. And so much of the work that I did in independent study is codified in this book. So when I say I wrote it in a year, it wasn't like research, but it was definitely written in a year, you know. It wasn't researched in a year. It's probably since 2013. But Caitlin Ketchum really gave me free reign on what I could talk about. And there were things where I kind of was like touching on talking about it. And she was like, no, lay it out. Because I didn't want to do things in my book like duplicate harms. Like, I'll tell you about my own family story. So the Great Migration, it was a period of time between Reconstruction. People gave it a very narrow time frame from like 1918 to 1968. I feel like that's short-sighted. It's really from Reconstruction to 1979. And at least that's because where the census is best, the data is best. And it was a period after enslavement where Black people were basically told by the U.S. government, well, go off, you know, and pick yourself up by the bootstraps that you don't have because you have zero money. Like, you know, enslavement ends, there are very few programs, not an adequate need, and Black people are left to our own devices. And I think we did a damn good job given the circumstances. 6 million Black people moved during that period, and it is undiscussed. And as I say in my introduction, growing up, we learn in history that there is chattel slavery, Black people disappear, maybe you get a Tuskegee Airmen in there, and then Martin Luther King Afro's righteous indignation, civil rights. Martin Luther King dies for the sins of the country next. And it's horrible because it is, if you do not know, like, you know, often said adage, if you do not know where you come from, you don't not know where you're going. But the other thing is that I talk about things like redlining in my book that prevented Black people from being able to like get a solid footing. And I also talk about the GI Bill and how Black civil rights organizations were fighting for gay people of all races during this time period because not only could Black GIs not benefit from the GI Bill, but discharged GIs under the blue discharge papers, which were disproportionately given to Black people and to gay service members. You could basically fire somebody no matter how long they had served and they were screwed. They had basically chosen this career or were drafted and then fucked because of who they chose to fuck. And or were perceived to. And so I have bars. And so I wanted to kind of contextualize for people that Black history is so rich and so profound and so deep. And it should be beautiful too, which is why I decided to have the book be illustrated. But because the book is illustrated, so many people think that it is like, I don't know, like it automatically got categorized to YA. Don't know how that happened. I didn't have any control of that. But it's also exciting because it makes me, it just tickles me to think about people who would buy this book thinking this is like an approachable, safe book to get my Black neighbor, and then, or like my white neighbor's Black kid. And it's like, surprise! It's actually very, you know, it's heavy. And one of the things about this that was interesting, this is me being a historian, and just, this is an interesting thing I think everybody will think is interesting, but I had to go to Berlin to get an original manuscript of the Black Panther Party 10-point program because of the, so like there's so many efforts. I basically came to the conclusion that unless, if you can find an American history textbook that talks about the Black Panthers and includes the Black Panther 10-point program, it's usually from a doctored image created by the New York Daily News, and it's still available. So it's still being used and licensed from Getty Images and stock images. And it uses 11 points. Even though it was famously the 10-point program, it's listed as 11 points. And that is used to shape the legacy of the Black Panther program. And the added point is Black control of the welfare system, which fully undermines what the Black Panther Party was about, because they didn't want Black people to have to be on welfare. So this book, like, I felt like I contributed to the scholarly space, and did that in a way that helped other people to like understand. because the fact that 6 million Black people moving, like, how did Detroit suddenly become a Black city? How did Oakland emerge? You know, how did Baltimore emerge? Why are the uprisings taking place right now, the ones that are happening in 2020 today, taking place where they are? It's because of this past century.
Mm-hmm. And I love your origin story for the book, because one of my ulterior motives for writing the book and having this outward-facing public social media presence is to tell other people that you don't have to have a PhD in order to write history or to do the research. Anyone has the tools to go into an archive, the New York Public Library, DC Public Library, all of these archives are open to the public for a reason. And there are so many stories just waiting to be told. So I hope because we have very similar stories about just kind of cold tweeting or cold emailing random people.
I mean, that's how we got connected.
Exactly, right? So I hope people who are listening who feel like you don't have the resources to write history or write your own story, ask for help, right? Like, there's always going to be someone who wants to take you under your wing or can at least give you advice on where to look next. So I'm so glad that you shared that. And so I do want to get to the current moment.
Yes.
And tell me now how you went from being a historian now to being really a star, not just on social media, but putting really your body on the line. And you've been doing that for years. So tell me about that process up until today.
So I have to say, for my own sanity, I'm retired. Like, literally every one of my relatives, as soon as they saw the protests popping off in LA, they're like, Blair, where are you? And I'm like anytime. Like, I was in I was in New York when Patricia Okomo climbed the Statue of Liberty, and my grandma was like, Blair, are you out there? And I'm like, no, because one time I get arrested very publicly once, you know. But anyway, I'm still suing the Baton Rouge police. Essentially, so okay, picking up from when I left LSU, I worked at Heineken because I thought I wanted to be a lobbyist and a lawyer. No, not true. And then so I went to work at Planned Parenthood. It was a cool job though. I went to work at Planned Parenthood. And my first month on the job, I ended up getting arrested. I was hired specifically because of my work doing organizing in the South, because I had organized one of the Louisiana queer conferences, which gave me networks all across the South, like for folks to come to LSU and just be gay and talk about organizing and how we're going to get free. And I did a civil disobedience training. Anyway, a lot of the activism I had done resulted in young people from different high schools knowing who I was. So when the protest happened in Baton Rouge, I got in touch with Myra Richardson, who organized the protest. And like everyone suddenly understands, it was peaceful until the police showed up. It used to be so hard to explain that, but now it's been a talking point for a week and people get it, which is like, finally. So I had gone there literally just to support the kids, but as people now understand, shit got out of hand. Police showed up for a fight. I was literally in shorts, and I had gotten arrested, and I was responsible for making sure that the press were there. I wrote the press releases. I do communications, which has also helped me on my trajectory. But so as the police were descending on us, there was a lawn across from the protesters that was just covered in AP, Reuters, BBC, all of the cameras, and they all had my contact info. I don't think they knew who I was, face and name, whatever, but they started reaching out after I got arrested. Guess who has my phone at this time? My mom. My mom's the OG. She came down to Baton Rouge with me. I wasn't living in Baton Rouge at the time. I was living in DC with my new grown-up job at Planned Parenthood doing the thing. I make the joke to one of my coworkers, what if I get arrested when I go down there? Because I told people, I was like, I have to go. Part of the reason you hired me is because of my connections there. I need to show up, And then Alencia Johnson, she goes, well, Cecile got arrested, Cecile Richards, so you'll be fine. I'm thinking I'm fully joking. I'm like, ha, 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 that'll never happen. This will be so, cakewalk. My mom's like, bitch, you ain't going without me. She comes down, verbatim. And when I thought we were going to get arrested, I know I'm kind of all over the place, but it's very nonlinear. When I thought I was going to get arrested, I handed my phone to my mom. And because of that, she had a direct line with all the press that had already contacted me. when the police grabbed me in that image that's on my Instagram, they said to me, really give it to her. I immediately think of Selma. I immediately think of the civil rights tactics, because that's what they do. They brutalize you when the cameras are gone. I start screaming at the top of my lungs. That's why like my face is like all scrunched. I'm literally off the ground by two men who had refused to identify themselves. I still don't know the name of the people who arrested me. We're still suing Baton Rouge PD. I screamed at the top of my lungs because there was a SWAT tank. I was so afraid that they would walk me past behind there where there was no view and really give it to her. That's what they said. And so as I started screaming, somebody decided to capture that and use it as B-roll for every single story about the protest for the next week, which means I was on Telemundo. I was on BBC. It was very wild because we went back to Louisiana, we went back to DC, and I would be like walking around, walking to work, and I could hear my own scream on people's phones as they were watching news clips. It was super surreal, and I hated just feeling like that disembodied and feeling that disconnected from my literally own voice. So I was like, okay, I had decided that this work was going to be behind the scenes, and it can't be anymore. I'm not willing for my face to be detached from who I am. Like, by that point, I think I was in touch with Little Miss Flint, who is now well known as Mari Copeny, and people know who she is, but for a long time was memed into the little girl who had a picture hugging Obama and a picture kind of being repulsed at Trump, And there's this little girl now who's floating around in the current moment who's wearing that teal green shirt, and she's mouthing, no justice, no peace, and people are like, oh, inspo, and it's like, she's a little girl, that's a person, like that's going to ultimately shape her. Like, complete aside, like Tay Zonday, who did the song Chocolate Rain, did my audiobook, and he actually did history as well, but he was memed. Like, people didn't consider that Chocolate Rain is actually a ballad about white supremacy and the malaise of racism that we endure on a regular basis. People are just like, this is viral, I didn't want that to happen to me. I also idolize Angela Davis. So I was like, I will become highly visible and then I will be safe. Not true, not how it works at all. I'm a historian, I should know that. But that's kind of what shaped into me doing influencing work. Also, what had happened before any of this, before I graduated LSU, was in 2014, I did an internship with my cousin, Tay Hansberry, who is the grandniece of Lorraine Hansberry. And she's been super dope, especially recently with the influencer thing. This was 2014, so it was before you could schedule posts. She made me work so hard with her blog. I hated it. I thought, okay, I'm going to be a blogger. I'm going to get free clothes. I'm going to go on vacation for free. I can drink, like thin shakes. It'll be great. Not true. It's very hard work. Lots of research goes into it. When that was happening, I remember sitting on her floor organizing her jewelry, and and I got an alert that my picture had been used on the front of the Times-Picayune, which is like the New Orleans Times. And it was me holding a sign that said "Trust Louisiana Women" at one of the rallies I was at. And I was so silly. I was like, well, if I wear a pink shirt, then I can't lobby, because then, they'll think I'm like, especially in Louisiana, abortion is very taboo. So I wore a black and white dress so I could blend in as a member of the public, and I just stood out more, and I had my big hair, and I ended up on the front. So it was kind of like a call to where I was like, okay, maybe I can learn the skill set of influencing, but at the end of the day, I'm really more fulfilled by grassroots and by history. Doesn't mean it's mutually exclusive at all. And I think that the interest that I've gotten from the work that I do has really demonstrated that, because everything now, you have to make it sexy for people to want to pay attention. Like, there's a song that's been stuck in my head about over policing in Black communities that a TikToker created, and like, it really succinctly explains fuckery in a way that like sometimes academic institutions want to do with 25 pages and a survey, but you can do it in like 15 seconds. So that's what I've become really interested in.
And so one thing that you've mentioned is there's a lot of this white guilt that is coming to the surface this week, and a lot of questions, including, I'm just as guilty of it, of asking, especially what can cis gay white men do in this moment to not just be a good citizen, but also to make sure that future historians don't judge us just as we are judging our ancestors for excluding the most marginalized in our movement. So I'm going to ask the question, which is, what can we do?
I think the biggest thing is to know where we come from. And I mean, like, as historians, that's catnip for us. But truly, I recall, like, I had become kind of like I came out. The other thing about me is I came out on Fox News in 2017. I did not mean to.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I always forget to mention that. It's funny, too, though, because, like, I am, like, comprised of, like, 3 viral moments. I'm the girl who LeVar Burton got her book published, the girl who came out on Tucker Carlson, and who got arrested in Baton Rouge. And I sat next to somebody on a plane, and they were like, wait, that's you? Okay, I thought that was, like, 3 different people. But anyway, that was announced to me. And then I was like, I need to work on my branding, and I improved. But it's like, okay, so we have to know where we come from. So after I came out on Fox News on Tucker Carlson, it's a great clip, highly recommend on YouTube. I kind of became like, oh, you know, she's the new gay. Like, you know, there's always like once a year, there's the gay kid that comes out who's cool and people exotify them and like, you know, fetishize them. And then you have, you know, your regular gay person. But it's like a debutante ball for a little while. And so I remember being in those spaces at those cocktail parties in New York and getting into conversations with people who used to be like the Spice Girls makeup artist. And I was telling them about what I do in the name of my book. And the subline for modern history is women and non-binary people rewriting history. And he goes, well, see, when I was growing up, we didn't have all that. It was just gay and lesbian. And I was like, oh, that's wild because, you know, we wouldn't have had Pride without 2 Black trans women who are both genderqueer, and it's unclear whether or not they identified as trans women, but we didn't have vocabulary then. So it's, you know, it's one thing to say that the vocabulary wasn't there, but the people certainly were. And he was like, oh, absolutely. Like immediately, like flipped. He went from being like, that didn't exist to, oh, of course it existed. We couldn't name it. Such a shame. It was like just wild to see. And then I realized how many people are in these spaces who are kind of iconified as you are, you know, gay America, but they're disconnected from the origin. And it made me realize, okay, so just because you come out, just because you're part of a community, doesn't mean you know all the history, you know all the academia. Like every time somebody comes out, like Sam Smith, who actually really engages with the work around gender theory and being genderqueer, and like you mentioned, Alo collaborated with them, and they're doing really good work, Sam Smith. But like when folks come out, the media expect them to be like, just bring you all the knowledge. Like, oh, right. I came out, and then like, you know, at night the gay tooth fairy comes, and instead of leaving a tooth, like whispers into your ear, like, you know, Mother Marsha's words. It doesn't happen. We all have to do the work. And so I think in the same, like the way that we avoid judging people is what I really feel happened following Stonewall is that Stonewall, whether people like it or not, was fully informed by the Black Panther Party, was fully informed by Marxist-Leninism, was fully informed by the communist like movement and movements, and then also suppression. And the people who benefited most from those movements, just like the people who benefit most from affirmative action, are white women. The people who benefited most from the breaking down of barriers for gay people created by trans people, you know, fighting these things, was not trans people. It was, you know, folks who look like you. And then you have folks who kind of benefit from that and then immediately are educated to distance themselves. So the homophile movement, which, you know, I'm sure you know, that's what it was called. It was just the homophile movement. We're just gay, just like you. Didn't work. And so when Stonewall happened, it was like, fuck this shit, fuck this system. We're not doing this anymore. And that's when progress happened. Then people completely ignored what was the catalyst. And then we're like, you know, 50 years later, we're just like you. Don't, you know, and now, and so what I really hope doesn't happen in this current moment with this uprising is that reform happens and repackaging happens. I don't want us to, you know, install a bunch of Black leaders or new police chiefs that look like us but don't care about us. I don't want to see people feel like this is a box they can check. But I do feel like it's fundamentally different because there are people who had so many opportunities to give a fuck and learn and are now doing that. And I just don't feel like that's going to go away. I keep saying that we can't unlive this moment. And it's really about recognizing that when the present invites you to be a part of history, you have to say yes, because you will be a part of it either way. That was a good one. I should remember that one. You have to say yes, because whether or not it's in the way you imagine for yourself, it will be recorded. So,
Yeah.
like, you know, Donald Trump, there's no going back. You know what I mean? Their harm cannot be undone. And I think that people need to recognize what they're going to, what they mean in that context. And so I really have to, like, shout out my friend Jason, who Rosenberg, who is a white cis gay man, and he was linking arms with ACT UP activists on the bridge in New York, and the police beat him. He had to get staples in his head. They broke his arm or dislocated his arm. He didn't have to get surgery, but he has been talking the talk and walking the walk for such a long time. He also is a white, you know, like there are parts of gay culture that people parody, like the jokes about, like, well, white gays would rather go to brunch than whatever, you know? And it's like, you can fucking do both. I've had nice brunches with Jason, but Jason is also about that life, you know what I mean? Like, this is a time to walk the walk and talk the talk and really recognize that we have to do both in our context, right? So Jason was already trained as an ACT UP organizer. That makes sense. But it doesn't mean to suddenly shift paradigms or shift fields. We have to continue to do the work in history. But if you are someone who is a communicator or somebody who hires people and makes decisions, then you need to be anti-racist to help other people get hired. You need to be anti-racist to help people get loans so that they can advance themselves. We have to put it into context. And so that's why I decided I can't do this organizing thing anymore. It's killing me, literally. I want to live in the world I'm trying to create. I can be a lot more preserved and whole being an educator. And that's a call we have to make for ourselves. Like, I can't go to the protests right now, even if I wanted to, which I desperately want to, because my dad is old and I live with him and, you know, he could get sick. And so, like, even if there wasn't a pandemic, I'm also suing the police. I'm still at risk. And so, put into context the work that you have to do. And I always make kitchen metaphors, which is how I know I really went to school in the South. You have to look at your proverbial refrigerator of ingredients for the justice potluck, okay? Don't bring mac and cheese if a Black woman has been making mac and cheese for the past 10 years. Don't decide to bring mac and cheese and, like, derail her. Bring something else. Like, I feel like so many people are trying to bring proverbial mac and cheese, and they have no macaroni, they have no flour, they have no cheese, they have no eggs, but they're like, oh, I can do this. No, you have celery, you have lettuce.
Make a salad.
You know what I mean? You have to pick a lane and do it well. You can't just decide to pivot. There are some people, though, I will say as a, you know, I hate saying, like, generalizations. I have a friend named Taylor who, following the arrest in Baton Rouge, decided to sell her condominium, cut herself off from her parents' trust fund, move to Standing Rock, and to be part of the Standing Rock protests, because she was like, I've benefited so much from institutional racism as a white person. We've benefited from redlining, everything. If I pause and contribute myself to the movement 100%, I'll be able to bounce right back, because that's how much privilege I have. And I recognize that, so I'm going to put myself on the line. And I think that if there are people in this moment who feel as though, you know what, if I really took a pause and committed myself wholeheartedly, but learned and was humble as I did it, because you don't want to go free reign, and you can go to my Patreon and I'll teach you, we'll hold hands together. You really do it. You know, this is the time when we learned about things that are atrocities throughout history, and you're like, fuck, what were they doing? Those freaking sheep? Why didn't somebody do something? You're that person right now, unless you decide to actively do something. And even if it's not something big and ostentatious, you do have to decide how to move forward from this, from the pandemic, from the uprising, because shit has changed, and you should too.
Amen. We have a few questions in a very few minutes, so I'm going to bring back...
We can go over time. I have time.
Oh my gosh. Well, let me bring Vivian. Vivian, I'm toggling your mic. Can you toggle it? No? I might kick you off.
Your phone, swipe out and come back.
Yeah, I'm going to close you out and bring you back, okay? And I'm going to ask the first question, which is, does she have a podcast or something? She's really cool. And yeah, she has a lot to say.
That made me blush. Oh my gosh, I've been blushing forever. Yes. So I'm starting a podcast with my white friend, Kate. Kate is someone who's really being helpful right now. Kate Robards. She's a comedian. She's a divorcee. She's from Texas. And when I met her, I was like, she's definitely racist. And she's not. But she's actually anti-racist. And so we just recorded our trailer today. It goes live July 4th. It's called America Did What? And every episode is us telling you some shit you didn't know that America did, but that they definitely did. We're talking MK Ultra. We're talking Woodrow Wilson. We're talking about the racism of the New Deal that everybody loves to say is the best shit ever. We're talking redlining. We're talking don't ask, don't tell. And we'll probably have you on for that episode. So yeah, that's happening. And I have my Instagram. That's where I post a lot of free knowledge. But I'm just fucking happy that people are finally listening.
Amazing. Okay, Viv, you got the
Can
next
y'all
one?
hear me?
Yes.
Yay! I just had to say this. Richard from Australia says, Blair, you're looking fierce. And it's so true. I want to know what eyeshadow that is. Can you just tell the people?
Okay, so this shadow, honestly, will y'all cover me while I go get it? Because it's a queer-owned brand. I'll be right back.
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Sure.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
All
In the
right.
meantime, what else we got?
Yeah, Eric, one great question that somebody asked is, what should be the role of a popular historian in political dialogue? This is from Andrew. He says, David Blight is a good example of a historian who has a point of view but uses history to contextualize instead of flattening out history, in the words of a podcast host, to prove a political point. Is there any downside to using history to prove a political point about today's current events?
No.
I'll say, yeah. I'll say this. I didn't go into what's it called fluid.
And it's
Fluid.
Elysium. And
Called
the cool thing is
Universal Gloss.
Before we go to the question, I think it says universal gloss. Universal meaning it's for your eyes, it's for your lips, everywhere, you know. But it's also for anybody. And people say influencing doesn't do anything, but HBO, as they were promoting the show Legendary, went to queer brands and promoted them as a part of the swag that they were giving out. So everyone can do something. Like, say that you're the person who's in charge of marketing at a huge place. Okay, well, we're promoting a queer thing. Let's make sure we have queer people doing it. Anyway,
I love that. It's
question-
only $15. I'm about to buy it right now.
hooray! And it's, yeah. Oh my goodness, my beauty influencer career is taking off. As far as the history point making, I think that the only harm I could really think of is that it threatens to historicize something, to make it seem as though everything's gotten better. I really hate when people say that. Like, I was talking about how there's an urgent need for anti-racism, and like, of course, there's always going to be one white person who's like, but it's getting so much better. And it's like, you don't get to decide, first of all. And then also, the fact that it is getting better is not a cop-out to stop making it even better. You know, like, oh yeah, high five, you're not enslaved anymore. What if we stopped there? You know, like...
Love that.
And the only thing I'd add is that, you know, for me, I didn't go into writing this book saying I'm gonna like expose how like the homophile movement was exclusionary because of its strategy of respectability. Right. I just wanted to learn about Frank Kameny. But then you follow the stories and the hints that arise in the archive that are very easy to miss. The easy thing to do is to just say, all right, here's Frank's story. Here's the Mattachine Society's story. Here's the homophile movement. And not to look at what Sylvia Rivera was doing at the same time, and not to look at Ernestine Eppinger, who was the first Black woman to protest for gay rights, what their words were. The easy thing is not to be making those connections, and I think it doesn't have to do with proving a point. The point will prove itself through the archive, as long as you're doing your job as a historian and actually tracking down not just the one narrative that's easy to access, i.e. the white one, but tracking down all of the different threads, whether it's Bayard Rustin, whether it's the Daughters of Bilitis, any of these other figures that have otherwise been forgotten in other narratives.
And I think on that point too, another thing that's even crucial for us to do as queer history historians is to not pigeonhole people into boxes. Like I said, my cousin is Lorraine Hansberry grandniece. I'm not related to Lorraine Hansberry. If I were, everyone would know. But it's the other side of the family. but everyone wants to put Lorraine into being a lesbian who was married to a man. Okay, bisexuals exist, pansexuals exist. Also, Black people as a people, like, have had labels imposed upon us. Like, you know, James Baldwin was a man who loved men. But did he use the word gay for himself? Not for a long time. Little Richard just passed. He was never comfortable with being called queer. But how do we capture, well, he was briefly, but anyway, how do we capture the truths and complexities of a person without saying gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans? Like, even in my book, when I have the title and non-binary people, you know, for the, it's hairy to, you know, based on other people's accounts, because she wasn't interviewed. Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, how did they identify? Would they have, who knows? And so I think saying that in the literature is important for, as a historian. We can't just walk around here being Suetonius and saying this is what happened and that's it, because he lied all the fucking time. That's an old classical history joke for y'all who aren't aware. But anyway, we have to be like, and though she never came out, Lorraine Hansberry is regarded as a queer icon because of her letters. And so I think leaving it open and saying, and we also don't know, gives room for additional scholarship in the future.
Yeah, I love that. This is an awesome question that Rick asked. So, Blair, you talked a lot about your Black identity and your queer identity. Not that they are, like, independent on their own. But can you talk about LGBT issues in the Muslim community?
So I have a TED Talk. If you go to blairimani.com/FAQ for frequently asked questions, a lot of people ask me that because it's weird, you know, like, so being a queer Muslim who does engage in queer history, like, a lot of people come to me as an authority. People come to me as an authority regardless of what my credentials would be, just because of who I, like, my identity groups, and then kind of how I came out was very public on Fox News. Don't ever come out on Fox News. I corrected him. I was like, oh no, I'm actually a Black queer Muslim woman. And then I was like, fuck, I just came out. But I held it together through the end of the interview. But anyway, on the FAQ page, I talk about it because basically what it comes down to is colonization. In pre-colonial African and Islamic societies, sodomy, things that are, even the word sodomy does not exist. The invention of homosexuality comes about much later in the story of Islam. And, you know, Muslims were historically permissive of whatever sexual behavior, as long as it was private, because, you know, Islam has always been very much about modesty, whether or not it was head covering. It was very much about, like, do that shit over there, you know? And so it wasn't until Victorian colonization when virginity starts to become, you know, a thing, and homosexuality becomes a thing that is criminalized. And it's evident because there are countries, don't ask me to name them, that do not have, that are Muslim majority, but do not have criminalization of, you know, same gender romantic relationships or sexual relationships, because they were not colonized. So there's, like, this shift. And so what I always tell people, like, you know, you'll have people, less so now, like, as soon as I got more followers, suddenly a lot of folks want to, like, shout me out as a Muslim, and I'm like, oh wow, thanks. This is probably because I got more attention, but we'll just pretend it's genuine. And it's funny because a lot of people want to tell me that I'm westernizing Islam. On both sides, you have these, like, religious liberals who are like, no, Islam is bad, religion is bad. And I respect when people have difficult times with the religion, and it carries into how they perceive religion largely. And then you have other people who are, like, hardcore fundamentalist Muslims who are like, you're taking away what Islam is. What it comes down to is that the reason why so much radicalization is happening right now is that there's this belief within different religious sects, I mean, from, like, Mormonism to Sikhism, that you cannot reconcile religious doctrine with modern life, which is not true. And I try to represent to people that that is not true through the lens of history, through the lens of, like, you know, in my heart and fucking with evidence, you know, I know what happens when people are told they cannot be themselves. It causes mental health issues, and that is historically accurate. So I basically break down my theological beliefs, but I work also as an ambassador for Muslims for Progressive Values, and that's our whole statement. Is you can go to mpvusa.org. That's muslimsforprogressivevalues.org. And the work that we do is queer affirming. It's ending things that, you know, are considered to be part of Islam, but are not. Like, it's so complex where you have the right-wing people who are saying this is what Islam looks like. Then you have fundamentalists who are saying this is what Islam looks like. Then you have this huge group in the middle, Muslims who are like, like the show Rami, who are chill, who are struggling with their faith, like everybody else. But because we're Muslim, it's assumed that we're like super hardcore. So that's a constant question I deal with. And I have the FAQ page because like that just says it really accurately there and concisely. But I encourage you to watch the TED Talk because you can be queer and a person of faith, and specifically a queer Muslim, and that's it. It's fine. And I have like Islamic doctrine that represents that. And I really encourage people to just think about how colonization affects homophobia and queer antagonism, because it is throughout all religions, and even outside of religion, it's in like doctrine that is non-religious, in edicts, in the ways that the Romans were super gay, but were like super taboo about it because it had to do with challenging masculinity to be a bottom. Like these things, that's what I really want folks to look at, those commonalities, not making it exclusive to one religion or another.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut this conversation short because I literally wish I could sit here and talk to y'all forever, but we do have another event in like 30 minutes. We're back to back.
Well, I think that Eric and we should do an Instagram live at some point. Yes. Like, this is really great. We have to bring history to the people. History Channel should give us a show.
Yes.
And stop talking about aliens, because that shit's racist. If y'all watch Ancient Aliens, that's a racist show. I'm going to do a blog post on that next. But anyway, This has been really dope, and I thank you so much. It means a lot when folks who are acknowledged and lettered by academia acknowledge folks who are not. So I appreciate you for sharing your space and your privilege in that way. And of course, make sure to support local book owners, to support Interrobang Books. Buy The Deviant's War. Send it to somebody who's homophobic. Maybe they'll pick it up on accident. Okay, let's go off.
I love that, and thank you, Blair, for teaching us, for teaching everyone who's listening on Facebook and YouTube. And as everyone knows, teachers deserve to be paid. So please click that green button that says support Blair. I cannot wait for your podcast coming out on July 4th. I will be the first in line to listen to it. And then we'll start scheming for our Anti-Aliens History channel.
Yes!
I'm absolutely obsessed. So thank you again for joining us and for doing all the hard work all these years.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you, Viv, as well. And thank you, everyone, for joining. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.